Mr. Pond Boss.
Here we go. Let's go live for a little bit.
To make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
Hello, everybody. Bob Lusk. It must be Tuesday night. The Pond Boss coming at you live from Lusk Landing, number 2, right here on the shores of the Brazos River, right over there. River looks pretty good today. It looks like a spot I'd like to be hanging out with you guys and just talking ponds and lakes and fish. Bill Schrum, he and I were texting a while ago. He got a pit tag, not a pit tag, but a Floyd tag at a bass that got infected. I don't see that very often. Matter of fact, I can't remember last time I saw it. You guys say hello. You know the drill. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comments section. Click like, share it to your timeline. There's John Wilson. He's right here on time with us tonight. Big John checking in from Cleveland, Ohio. At least that's where I think he is, if he's at home. Hello, John Henry. You made it on time. Tonight I thought I'd start off talking about trophy fish production. I think that's going to be kind of cool. There's David Schneiderman checking in. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. Click like, share it to your timeline. You're eligible for a drawing for a Pond Boss hat. I'd show you one, but I gave them away. Hello, Deborah Corlew. Good to see you. So what I thought I'd start off talking about till you guys start throwing some questions at me is about trophy bass. And trophy production of any fish, the principles are the very same. Of course, every time we start talking about this, you guys that have been around a while know this is what I preach. Happy water, prime habitat, the food chain for that species of fish, whether it's a bluegill, a walleye, a largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, crappie, or a gar. They got to have it. Hello, Danny Mack, checking in from San Antone. Kind of been warm down in your neck of the woods. I was down there last week on Tuesday and Wednesday at the Texas A&M Bamberger Ranch, which is a pretty cool ranch, by the way. Hill Country Ranch near Johnson City, where the last 3 years, Texas A&M, or I guess last 4 years, Texas A&M has held a camp for incoming seniors in the Range Wildlife and Fisheries Management Department. And it's a mandatory camp. And they go for 2 weeks where they're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I think they get the weekend in the middle off, but they're there with some really, really intense studies. They get to do 2 days of pond management, wildlife management, trapping pigs, control burns, identifying rangeland plants, fishing as part of their sampling techniques. It's pretty darn cool. And they get 6 hours credit for that 2 weeks. But they're there, they start at 7 in the morning and they wrap up at dark. So it's pretty intense, but it's really fun. And I enjoy doing the pond management piece. Hello, Christy Berg from Logan, Kansas. Ron Krisman checking in from Michigan. If I remember right, I think he told me Door, Michigan. Good to see him. Our smallmouth guy, he raises smallmouth bass. So, with the concept of trying to grow trophy fish, you got to have all those things. You got to have a harvest plan. You got to be selective about what you cull. But since I work mostly with largemouth bass, that's what I'm going to tackle first. Largemouth bass, what I've learned over the years, this is my 46th year, and I started figuring this out about 10 or 12 years in because it takes that long for a fish to get really to be, double-digit big. At least it did take that long. It doesn't take that long now because we started kind of cracking the nut on that. But number one, you do have to have great genetics. But if you don't have great genetics, that doesn't mean you're not going to grow some trophy fish. But even if you have trophy growth genetics with Florida strain largemouth bass, for example, there's no assurance you're going to grow trophy bass because all these things have got to come together. Job one, this is something that you're not going to hear anywhere else, I don't think, unless somebody copies me because I made this up, figured it out, etc., etc. You have 2 jobs to grow a big fish. Job one is to get it to 16.5 inches, largemouth bass I'm talking about. You got to get it to 16.5 inches as fast as you can. Now, here's the premise for that thought. A fish has got to have great, healthy water all the time. There's Wyatt checking in from, I presume he's in Denver. Jim Allen from Louisville, Kentucky. Boy, the Kentucky Derby was a sloppy mess, wasn't it? But it was fun to watch for 2 minutes. Anyway, here's where I'm going. You're not going to learn this in a book. I had to figure this out by myself. If a fish misses a meal for more than about 6 or 7 days in a row, can't make it up. So that means that there's growth potential that's lost. So when those fish get stacked up in that 10 to 14 inch size class and they stay there for a long time, even when you can finally nudge them out of that, a significant amount of their growth potential is gone. So if those fish had the potential to hit, 13 or 14 pounds, and they stay in that slot, it's not growing very well, running out of food, their growth potential, I mean, if they miss a meal for 3 months, they can't make that up. So that's one real important thing. Hello, Kenny Sanderson. He's checking from northwestern Kansas. Good to talk, good to see him, good to hear from him. So job one is get those bass to 16 and a half inches as fast. Now, how do I come up with 16 and a half inches? Measure the mouth gape size of a 16 and a half inch bass, and you're going to find out it can eat a 10 or 11 inch bass. So the bigger the bass get, the bigger their meals are. So it's incumbent upon us as fisheries managers to make sure that those fish have the right size and the right quantity of fish for food that they can have every single day. Yeah, John Dyer, I will see you Thursday, buddy. I went shopping today, bought all the food and stuff for Old Fashions, because I know where you want to go, and I'll have one with you. I promise. Starting today. So, hello, Jeremy Duckworth. Good to see you, buddy. So, the job one is to get the bass to 16 and a half inches long. So now, here's, how do you do that? And what if it's a male? If you get a male to 16 and a half inches, it's probably not going to get a whole lot bigger, but if it does, you got a pretty good male. So once the bass hits 18 inches, that pretty well differentiates most of the males from the females. And I'm not telling you won't grow an 18-inch male. You're not likely, but most odds are high that it's going to be a female. So you want to protect the best of the best females. You want to be sure that their water is healthy all the time. You want to be sure that you've got the right genetics. And you want to be sure you've got a very intelligent culling program. That's where tagging some fish comes in handy. If you'll pit tag or Floyd tag some fish, then you're going to be able to see those fish, how they perform on down the road, and you can judge. Jim Allen says, I think this full moon was a boon for bass spawning. I feed MVP the other morning, and there was a pile of new bass at the feeder. I assume all the huge fish were hungry females. Good assumption? Maybe. Could be. When the moon is full and the bass are spawning, they typically just dial in on the spawn. And so that's what they typically do when the moon is full, is they're more emphasizing spawning than they are feeding. However, that doesn't mean that when a female is finished spawning in the full moon, she's hungry. I mean, she's devoted a lot of energy to producing eggs, and once she's able to release those eggs, then she's going to want to go feed. So yeah, I think that's a pretty fair assumption. So going back to the growth, one thing I've learned is, and my stocking plans have changed as I thought about the math and then saw the reality. Now let me tell you what that means. Let's say we stock 100 Florida bass, or with some F1 crosses, Florida by Northerns. Chico, good to see you, buddy. Hey man, miss hanging out with you. We got to get together here. I've been pretty busy, and I'm going to be pretty busy for a while, but man, the book's coming along. Chico was the first guy to tell me that I need to put a book together. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. If I forget, remind me, Chico. Because I want to talk about this trophy thing for a few minutes. So, let's say we stock 100 fingerling, Florida strain, plus a few F1 tiger bass that have the genetics into a properly stocked pond, where we've got, the bait fish are teeming, the fathead minnows have reproduced, we've set the stage, we've got bluegills in there, they're beginning to reproduce. We got red ear spawning between the red ear sunfish spawns. So you're building a good food chain. Of those 100 bass, 50 are boys and 50 are girls. Right now, there's not a good technology to figure out which are which when they're 1.5 inches or 2 inches long. Now, there's some people working on that, so we may not be too far away from knowing that. But we know the girls are going to be the ones that are going to grow the biggest. Well, one thing I've learned, even with great genetics, only a fraction, a percentage of them are going to be the ones that have the right growth potential. If given the opportunity and the time, they're going to get to be the biggest bass faster. So out of that 100 bass, you can throw half of them in the trash. The other half are girls. You can throw the boys in the trash. They're not relevant if you're trying to grow trophy fish. That's what this talks about. Hello, Owen Nelson. Good to see you. From Nebraska, Mike Cottrell. Going to Palapena tomorrow. Yeah, man, you guys had some harsh weather, buddy. Tornadoes, high winds, straight line winds, hail, big rain. If you didn't get a tornado, I bet you got hail. Yeah, let me know how that goes. So, got to go back. Where was I? Oh, okay. So out of those 50 that are females, about 25%, maybe 30% of them will have the genetic propensity and the opportunity and be able to condition themselves instinctively into that environment through the biology process called plasticity. They'll adjust to that lake. So 25 to 30%, so that's 15 or 18 of the original 100 bass are going to be the ones that have the best shot at growing huge. It's not very many, especially when you think about an acre being the same size as a football field. You know, and so when you start thinking about those odds, that's what caused me, probably 18 or 20 years ago to start recommending that we bump up the food chain numbers early on and then stock 200 bass per acre so we can increase the odds of the best fish thriving. So in order to grow as many female bass as big as we can, as fast as we can, so they can turn around and start culling some of the younger bass. Now there's some pros and cons about that. One of the pros is for those fish that are first stocked, they're going to be the ones that have the very best shot at growing the biggest. And they will differentiate themselves between 18 months and 2 years after stocking. You can see a significant difference in those best of the best females of that age cohort, of that age class of fish. And then by that time, they started reproducing. You know, so there's some culling going on already with the young of the year, and there's no assurances that those young of the year, that any of the best are going to survive being eaten. You know, and so the very best shot at growing trophy bass is out of your very first stocking. Your odds diminish after that. But there's management techniques you can use. So as you watch these fish grow, you got to be ready to adjust the food chain, cull some fish, keep the competition at bay as best as you can, which means selective harvest, like really, really, really selective harvest. I mean, you got to be picky. I remember a conversation, I've told it on this show before, that I had with Bill Dance years ago. He asked me when I was coming to Memphis, and it was going to be like 3 weeks. So I popped into Memphis, sat down with him, and we had a great conversation. We talked about habitat for fish, how I designed it, what he sees when he's fishing. You know, it was really fun brainstorming with him. And he asked me this question. He said, hey, Bob, I've got this 50-acre lake that's mine over east of Memphis, and I used to be able to work some shows, film some shows over there, but, man, I hadn't caught any big fish in like 4 or 5 years. What's going on? So I said, well, have you, how'd you stock it? He said, well, we stocked it with Florida bass early on, and he said, they did really good for a while. And he said, then, you know, I said, well, what'd you call it? He said, well, we started taking out 14 inches and under, and then our biologist said take out 16-inch bass and under. And then we finally got to the point where he's telling us to take all bass 3 pounds and under, and now it's 4-pound bass and under. So I leaned across the table and I said, Bill, did not learn this at Texas A&M in the fisheries school. Had to figure this out all by myself. A 4-pound bass, you listening? He said, yeah. Said a 4-pound bass will not grow to 8 pounds in a skillet. And he just died laughing. He says, can I use that line? I said, yeah, use it anytime you want to. But you see my point. He said, yeah. And I said, so is a 4-pound bass a boy or a girl? He said, well, they're females. I said, so you're calling your junior varsity. So where I'm going with this is, in order to grow some trophy bass or trophy walleye or trophy smallmouth, you've got to be selective about which fish you leave in a pond and which fish that you cull. And you got to be paying attention to that size class of fish's best forage fish. Smallmouth bass, you're probably going to need to be supplementing some crawfish. Use native crawfish. Don't go to Louisiana if you got smallmouth bass up there with Kenny Sanderson in northwestern Kansas. And pay attention to your forage fish. You got to watch that. And that's the way it is all the way up and down the pipe. Jeremy Day, what's up? I got your email. I got your daughter's emails. I haven't had a chance to answer her, but I will. I'm going to be able to do that tomorrow. I have been getting ready for the upcoming Institution of Higher Pondology coming up. We're going to start Thursday, all day Friday, all day Saturday. We've got a small group. We've got like 6 people coming, maybe 7. And I got room for one more. Somebody wants to pop in. I already went grocery shopping, but I usually overbuy because I don't want anybody to go home hungry. So that's what I've been working on. Been getting the curriculum ready. Been called all the attendees and talked to them for a few minutes. Got the menu in order. Got all the stuff ready. Everything just about ready to load and get going. So let's see here. Jason Foley, good to see Jason. Ian, thanks for, man, I love to do this. Now, let me tell you, I got to tell you this. My wife is not happy with me doing this at 7:30 because she would like to go to dinner with me afterwards. 8:30 is too late to eat. So she told me today to change the time. But give me a minute and we'll figure this out. I'll announce it or get Leanne to say something about it on this page. What's the best time to spray algae after a big rain knocks it down? Tell you what I would do, Ian. I would get a big treble hook and start throwing it out there. And the minute you see regrowth, you don't want to wait till it's breaking loose and floating to the top. That stuff's dead. So if you want to treat the algae, get it as it's growing up. Now keep in mind, algae is volatile. It's got a short life, quick death, breaks down, grows a lot. So it's repetitive. It's like a lawn. It's like a St. Augustine lawn in the South. You need to be mowing it about every 3 or 4 days. Algae is not quite that bad, but you need to be paying attention to that. David Reed, seems to be general wisdom that pond size limits how big certain species will get. How do you reckon blue cats or an alligator gar will get in a 2-acre pond in Jack County? Hello, Jim Norquist from northwestern Wisconsin. You know what? I'm going to go to Sister Bay, Wisconsin and go fishing in July. All right, let me tackle David Reed's general wisdom that pond size limits how big certain species will get. Yep, well, in a 3-acre pond, I've shocked up a 13-pound bass before, but you can bet your butt it was about the only fish in there. A blue cat, if you feed them in a 2-acre pond, would probably get 35 to 50 pounds, but you're not going to have many because they're top-line predators. Alligator gar, probably the same thing. And one thing about alligator gar is they're limited some by space more so than catfish are, and bass. So that's a pretty fair question. But I think you could grow an alligator gar 40 inches in a 2-acre pond. You might be able to grow 3 of them. Jeremy Day, my water was chocolate milk. After the gypsum, clarity is way better, greenish to almost aqua blue color. When digging, the groundwater table was also the same color. Any thoughts on the bluish tint? Yeah, I'd get I know you've had your water analyzed. The bluish tint, there's 2 reasons that can happen. One reason is because you've got a really large amount of calcium dissolved in the water. And secondly, the only other time I've ever seen really, really blue water was when the pH plummeted. I can't imagine that happening to you because you put gypsum in there. Joel Danauer, hello, Bob from Clinton, Louisiana. I got 4 to 6 of my large bluegill floating every day. That's not good. I don't know why that's going on, but I know this. My gut reaction is that something's going on. Something's going on with your water quality, and I don't know what that would be. We'd have to dig around into it. I think we may have talked about medicating feed. There is at Mississippi State, there's a veterinarian that's a fish pathologist. send me an email and I'll forward you that contact information. Contact them and see what it would take for you to send a few samples of either sick fish or fresh dead fish and see if they can see something that's going on. Jim Norquist is nice over there. Yeah, I've never been to I've been to Wisconsin a number of times, but I've never been up on the peninsula up there north of Green Bay. Jim Allen, we caught 2 channel catfish and 2 casts the other day. The cool thing is they were 14 to 16 inches long with black spots, smallest I've ever seen. They must have reproduced. That 14 to 16 inch fish probably is second year size. So that's kind of cool. You got some catfish reproducing, channel cat, and they still got the spots. So spots start to disappear when they hit about 2 pounds. So y'all pitch a few questions. I'm ready. We got 23 people watching. 3 people shared it. And if I can tell who shared it, then that puts you into the drawing for a hat. What's the maximum carrying weight per acre for bluegill on feed with largemouth bass in the pond too? Thanks. All right, let's talk about that. This is something that you guys, this hair is driving me nuts. My wife keeps telling me she's going to help me get it cut. It's her fault. I'm going to blame her my hair's long, which it is. So, her fault and long. So, Woodford, that's kind of my go-to. I kind of like Woodford. TX blend too. Angel's Envy. 2 or 3 others. What's the maximum carrying weight per acre for bluegill? So this is a good time to talk about this. There's a difference between productivity and carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is how much fish a body of water can handle per unit at any given time. So when I'm talking about this, carrying capacity for bluegill per acre is probably 200 to 250 pounds per acre, which that's pretty high. But that's bluegill where the water's fertile and they're being fed well, and that's even with largemouth bass. That's probably the carrying capacity. That doesn't mean you're going to have 200 to 250 pounds of bluegill per acre at any point in time, because it's so dynamic that your bass, since you mentioned with bass in there, the bass are continually feeding on bluegill. Bluegill are continually reproducing, in warm months. So all those numbers are changing by minute, moment by moment. But I'll tell you this, the productivity in a 1 acre pond, if you were able to capture every bluegill that grew in that pond that year over a course of a year, it's probably going to be 600 pounds per acre. But there's never that many because it's so dynamic, they're getting eaten and being converted into bass. So productivity compared to carrying capacity are 2 different things. Now there's been times when I've grown channel catfish in a 3/4 acre pond where I would grow about 3,500 to 4,000 pounds in that pond. But I never had more than about 700 to 800 pounds because I would go in there about every 3 months with a seine and cull the fish out and then butcher them for the freezer, and we ate a lot of them. Hey, there's Tommy Welsh, our favorite tattoo artist from Kentucky. I put a 10-pound bass into my 2 acre pond to try to control the bluegill population. Was that a mistake when trying to grow trophy bluegill? No, it's not a mistake. It's not a mistake that'll keep you from growing trophy bluegills. If there is a mistake, putting that 10-pound bass in that 2 acre pond took it out of the pond where it was thriving, so odds are high that 10-pound bass will grow up and be 8 pounds in another year. When you take a bass like that, a mature fish, out of its environment where it's thrived and put it into another one, even if it's a better environment, most of the time they won't make the change. But in terms of trying to, even a 10-pound bass, it's not going to eat your greatest, enemy. It's not going to eat your biggest bluegill. Hey, Fred Bingaman, good to see you, my friend, from St. Louis, America. Kenny Sanderson, carrying capacity or standing weight? Carrying capacity is how much fish that a pond can carry at any point in time without the water quality going to hell. That's pretty much carrying capacity. Standing weight is how much is in there at any given time. So even though the carrying capacity might be 200, 250 pounds of bluegill per acre, the standing weight in a bass pond is probably very rarely over 100 to 160 pounds, 170 pounds. So that's the difference. Good. That's a good point, Kenny. I was trying to convey that a while ago, but that's the way you asked it makes it make more sense. Explain some more fish biology. Hello, Dave Weber, north of western Missouri. Explain some more fish biology to us and why it is so hard to sex fish, especially largemouth bass. Well, because when you spread their little fins and look, they're not all endowed the same. You know, in the springtime, it's not too hard to tell. I hope somebody's laughing at that. Who's texting me? No, not for me. So the reason it's hard is because you truly, and actually I tell you what, I'm working on a project and it's working kind of in conjunction with what Jim Allen's doing on aging fish. Is I've had 3 different people who are culling bass to take pictures of the fish and then open it up and verify if it's a male or a female. And so far, the ones I've done, and I do this for a living, I was only 90% correct. Out of 35 fish, I missed like 3 of them or 4 of them, guessed wrong. You know, and looking at the vent, which that was during spawning season too. The ones I missed, this is kind of funny, the ones I missed were females that didn't have any red around the vent. Their vent was white and it protruded a little bit like a male's papilla. There's your fancy fish word for the day. But we cut them open, and those fish, this is pretty interesting. Those fish were so seriously underweight that their eggs never developed. They had ovaries. Looks like they were dissolving or absorbing their eggs. No chance those fish were going to spawn, and it looked pretty bleak for those fish. So one of nature's ways is when bass get crowded like that, there's not enough nutrition for those fish to begin to nurture and grow and build their egg masses enough to where they can spawn. It's kind of like they go within themselves just to not die and not expend all that energy on producing eggs at the risk of their body shriveling down to 60% relative weight. Jacob West, I got your water test. We're going to import that into the game plan. By the way, so you know, I'm working on a little PowerPoint presentation that I want you and your dad to help me with at the Institute, where we go through the process you guys went through when you built the lake, then you stocked it, then year 1, year 2, year 3 after the lake filled up. And that way we're going to be able to look at the progress that your fish are making or the ones that aren't, whatever it is. And we'll include that water chemistry in there as well. The river behind my place is flowing probably at 300 to 500 cubic feet per second, which is really nice. It's at 19,000 cubic feet per second a couple of weeks ago. It was roaring through there pretty fast. It didn't look unsafe, but it was, because when you've got that much water flowing, the water on top of the river is flowing at a different speed than water 4 feet under it, which is at a different speed than the water, all the way down to the bottom where it's here behind my house. It's probably 8 to 10 feet deep when it was flowing. So the river looks beautiful right now, and it's flowing really, really nice. Just it's a slow rate. We could wade in. Actually, there's enough water that if somebody wanted a kayak, hint, hint, they could come do that and enjoy the heck out of it. Bill Shrum, Secchi disc visibility is 5 feet 2 inches. Woo! Water temperature 78, 75% is 4 feet or less, covered with filamentous algae and some southern naiad. I treated about 1/4 of the pond with Q-Trine Plus last week and plan to treat more this week. Would it be beneficial for a plankton bloom to physically remove some of the vegetation? It could be. Because here's what's going to happen. When you treat the algae, that's going to give your bushy pondweed, the southern naiad, a blank check to grow. Because some of that algae is growing on that southern naiad and actually inhibiting its growth. So if you could pull out some of that southern naiad, and I don't know how much you've got. If you've got 75% of the pond is 4 feet or less, okay, so 75%. Yeah, you need to pull out some southern naiad. Better yet, you need to buy some grass carp. I would do that. With several bluegill and largemouth bass beds throughout the pond, would this do more harm? No, it would not do more harm. I would avoid the beds. It doesn't matter if it stirs up some muck. Those fish are going to keep those nests clean. And if your water is this clear now, that suspended muck won't stay there very long. Yep, Chico, he's got it. Chico's hung out with me a whole lot, and he knows that those. So with Kenny's question a while ago about standing crop compared to carrying capacity, compared to productivity, those are three different concepts. Productivity is high, carrying capacity is pretty good, but standing crop, that's the ticket that's going to help us grow those great big trophy bass. The bigger standing crop we have of the right size fish at the right time. Here's where it gets tricky. Because if you're really trying to grow trophy bass, you better be paying attention to it like at least every other week. Because when the bluegill reproduce, then they're going to come off the beds. Those little bluegills are going to feed a certain size bass. If you got threadfin shad, it changes the equation. If you got tilapia in the states where they're legal, that adds to the equation. And I'll tell you this, I don't have a trophy bass lake that I've ever managed, ever, where we produce a significant number of bass, double digits, where I didn't use gizzard shad. And that's a controversial thing in the fisheries business, but I'm telling you, every single trophy bass lake that I've ever managed that has a significant number of 8-pound plus largemouth bass, there's gizzard shad in it. And we manage for them. And we manage for them by, if they get overcrowded, we cull them. We manage them by culling bass. We manage them by feeding the fish that compete with them, like bluegills. They don't compete that much, but we'll feed the fish. And Chico's right. Bay Miltonberger, he says, ask Ike. So here's the deal. When we did the big field day at Ike at the Bay's place back in March, Ike Perkins, who's a fisheries biologist that actually runs a wildlife program on a ranch down near Catarina, he came up, and one of his specialties was sexing fish, and we captured, pit tagged, took fin clips for genetic identification. We weighed and measured those fish, and then Ike sexed them with a pipette with a plunger on it, like a little syringe, and he was 100% accurate. But that was during the spawn. It's really hard to do that after the spawn, or like in October or something. But boy, during the spawn, it's totally accurate. He's 100% right. Jeremy Day, how high off the water would you suggest your wood duck boxes be? I think it's more important to have a snake guard or a predator guard around the wood duck boxes. But the wood duck boxes that I've used and seen before are going to be, the bottom of the box is 4 to 5 feet off the surface of the water. And in most of those cases, it also, the way they're placed is influenced by how high the water will get. Dave Weber, much easier to do regular maintenance on your woody boxes if you place them on dry ground 6 to 8 feet high with a proper predator guard. He's right, because what he's talking about with maintenance is you got to get in there every year and clean out the nesting materials, like in January, December, January, and add new shavings in there. Ron Krisman, as far as spawning goes, do male and female mature at the same age class? Not really. They mature at the same size class. So female bass, like a smallmouth bass, you can answer this better than I can, but it looks to me like a smallmouth bass needs to be about 10 inches before it reproduces. So if it takes 3 years, that's how long it takes. But if it takes 1 year, that's how long it takes. So age class is not as important as how fast they get, how big. For example, when I was talking earlier about trophy fish, that one thing I noticed at bays, and that the genetic profiles are pointing to, and I've read that genetic report 3 times, and I've got questions for Josh Sackmar that I know he can answer. But one of those questions I've always known that the bigger bass spawn first. They're the ones that go dominate the beds because their eggs get mature more quickly. They have bigger ovaries, a lot more eggs. The eggs on the outside of the ovaries are vasculated better, so they're maturing quicker. And then plus, they can dominate the nest because they're bigger. So they go in there and they reproduce early on before the little bitty bass, the smaller females, can reproduce. And so those big female bass are spawning earlier. Well, in Bay Miltonberger's genetic profiles, it showed that the biggest bass had the highest percentage of Florida genetics, which makes absolute sense because those bass are 8, 9, 9.5 pounds. Well, we'd expect they would have a significant number of Florida genetics, but the surprising thing was the bass that were in the 10 to 14 inch size class also had significantly higher genetic percentages of Florida genes than those bass in the middle. So that was pretty interesting too. So it's going to be really, really fun for me to ask some of these questions. So what that tells me, or what it makes me want to believe, is that because those bigger bass, bigger females, are spawning first and earlier, they have a greater genetic influence on the young of the year fish. So that's pretty interesting, especially when you start thinking about trying to grow trophy bass. Hey, let's stop and do a commercial. Bird Dog, birddogit.com. There's my payment for this commercial. I get kind of a Yeti something here. Birddogit.com. Jonathan Lusk, yes, we're related. I'm his dad. But check that out. He's got a pretty interesting business model going on, and he's really a mover and a shaker. And I don't know where he gets it, because he's that boy's got a whole lot of energy. He's fired up. Purina Mills, they're a sponsor. I love their feeds. Love their feeds. David Schneiderman, Easy Docks of Texas. And Purina's got really good products. We just got to help figure them out, or get them to figure out how to make everything available. And I'm trying on that. We'll see what happens. But here we go. Texas Hunter Products. Chris Blood, if you're on here, chime in, buddy. I've been friends with Chris Blood for a long time, and I love how Texas Hunter does business. They make great products, and their customer service is just astounding. They're really, really good. So, there's my commercials for the day. In the Bob Lusk Institute of Pondology. The book. I was going to tell you about the book. So, I'm working on a book, and I'm not far from being finished. Matter of fact, I hope, and I really expect that it will be out by the time Christmas rolls around. Now, I don't know what it's going to cost, because I don't know how many pages it is, because it keeps morphing a little bit. But what it is, here's the deal. It's Christmas 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. My oldest son, we were around a campfire drinking a little bit of wine. My son Ty says, "Hey, Dad, you got some pretty cool stories. Why don't you write them down so we can have them after you're gone?" I guess that's what people start thinking when you're knocking on the door at 70 years old. And I said, Ty, that's a pretty good idea, because, how many times have you sat around a fire or in somebody's dining room table and listened to some very cool stories, and those people are not going to write those down, and when they die, they're gone. So I thought, you know what? I like that idea. That's a good idea. So I spent the next 6 months writing down every story I could remember that I've told over and over and over, and bless my kids, they've heard every one of them over and over and over. And so I wrote them all down. When I was younger, I umpired baseball. I've got some very cool baseball stories. Then I've got some life experience stories. And I've got some pretty good pond management stories. So what we've got so far is like 25 stories that I've handpicked out of the 60 that I've written. And most of those stories, I didn't have any pictures. So Mark McDonald, who's helping me edit this thing and helping put it together, told me about one of his running buddies that is an award-winning cartoonist. So we got in touch with him and sent him some of the stories. He says, "Man, I love these stories. Let's figure it out." Well, what happened was, after I wrote all the stories, my next son, Jonathan, that owns birddogit.com, he said, "Hey, Dad, not only should you write those stories, would you mind videoing them so we can see you after you're gone? And, your grandkids and even their kids might like to hear some of those stories from the old days." I said, "You know what? I think that's a great idea." So I called Chico, who's on here tonight. Chico is an outstanding videographer. I love Chico. And he was more than happy to come up, and we spent 2.5 days videoing me telling all those stories. And Chico's the one that said, some of these stories, you got 60 stories here. Some of these people might want to read. Might be beneficial, entertaining, funny, life stories, life-altering things that have happened to you. You ought to think about putting together a book. Well, Chico started it. That's when I sent some stories to Mark McDonald, who's a professional writer, editor, publisher. And I sent him, 6 or 8, and he said, man, these are pretty good. He said, send me some more. So the bottom line is I'm going to have a book coming out. Now, each one of these cartoons, and I'm going to have like 24 to 30 of them, are going to cost $300 a piece. They're going to be worth it. But that's a lot. And when you write a book and nobody buys it, you got a little money hickey there. So here's what I'm going to do. I asked Bill Dior, the cartoonist, if he would, if we could do 5 prints of each original cartoon, and then asked him if he would autograph those. So what my plan is to sell those for $100 a piece, and, drum roll please, you get a free book that I autograph if you want it. So that's kind of my marketing plan. We're going to use the videos when the book is about ready that Chico's done, and that's going to be part of a marketing tool. So you guys are going to get a shot at some memoir stories, and I promise you, some of them are pretty good. They really are. They're very entertaining. You'll have fun. So where were we? It's already 8:11. Dave Weber, I always hear within the industry that the conversion rate is 10 to 1 on native forage and 4 to 1 conversion ratio with fish food. I purchased a 50-pound bag of fish food from my local feed store last week, and it says on the front of the bag 2 to 1 conversion. Is that even? Yeah, that's absolutely possible, because here's the way that works. Look at it like this. When a game fish, I don't care what it is, a bluegill, a gar, a bass, when they eat, it takes 10 pounds of bait fish for them to gain a pound, and that's because those bait fish are 80% water. Think about that. So they got to eat that fish, and they got to get rid of the water, digest the dry matter, which is wet, and that's how they gain weight. 4 to 1 conversion ratio with fish food, that's on a really cheap fish food that's mostly grain-based, being fed to carnivorous fish. That 2 to 1 it's actually, here's the real world numbers, and I've done some trials on this. It's actually almost 1 to 1. Now, that is physically impossible. But here's what happens. When you're feeding that fish food to the fish, and in true force with like a 42% fish meal based protein being fed to bluegills, they're really going to convert that about 1.3 or 1.4 to 1. The way it goes down to 1 to 1 is when they eat that fish food, that 1.4 pounds grows into 1 pound of fish, but there's 0.4 pounds of waste. When that waste goes out, something takes that up, whether it's insects or it goes as fertility and creates plankton that turns around and feeds more insects. So even though that food comes out as waste, and some of it comes out, and some of it is converted from into energy, which doesn't turn into waste, it's probably more like 0.3 pounds that's waste, that's solid waste, then that in turn feeds something else lower on the food chain that in turn turns around and grows more food to feed these fish that we're growing. So, and I've actually had a couple of trials where the feed conversion was better than 1 to 1, which means that water was fertile, and in all fairness, we fertilized those ponds too and made sure they were fertile. So when you've got a good fish meal based protein fish food, that works. Okay, as far as spawning goes to male and female bluegill, okay, compare smallmouth to largemouth. Largemouth bass are going to reproduce. The small ones, the largemouth bass, boys are going to start to make milk at about 9 to 10 inches, and the girls are going to start making eggs at about 10 to 11 inches. So I've actually seen bass spawn their first year, not even 1 year old, and start having babies, but that's the biggest of the biggest, and not very many of them, just a few. So typically largemouth bass in the South are going to spawn in their second year, typically. And smallmouth bass takes longer than that because they don't grow as fast. If they could grow as fast as largemouth bass do, but they can't. So the age difference is at least a year between smallmouth and largemouth, even in prime circumstances. All right, Bill Schrum, I've seen several bluegills beds in my pond. Do you have any statistics on the success of the spawning ratio of bluegill in native habitat versus man-made spawning beds with pea gravel? Have a pond with red shell, sandy bottom. There's really no statistics on that at all. But I will tell you, just anecdotally, what I've seen is the success of the spawning ratios of bluegill. If they've got great native habitat, they're going to actually choose that over a gravel bed. So if they've got a sandy area or a gravelly area that they've used for years, and you add a few spawning beds, that doesn't mean they're going to come use them. And they're only going to spawn so many fish so many times every year, as long as they've got adequate substrate. So the way the statistics work is in ponds that don't have enough good native spawning areas for bluegills. That's where the statistics change. So when you're adding a lot more spawning beds in there for your bass or your bluegill to be able to reproduce, then you're going to get a whole lot better numbers coming up the pipeline. So there we go. 6 comments. Speaking of bays, have you had a chance to look at bays data with my age estimates? That is in the queue. I have been traveling a lot and going to birthday parties. Taught that camp last week, working on the Institute this week. However, that is, and I'm ahead on the Institute of Higher Pondology, so I'm hoping to get a little time tomorrow to answer some emails and look at some of these things that came in emails, and that's one of the things. So the answer to that, long answer is I have not. I've looked at it, I've perused it, I haven't studied it, and I want to. John Arson, the bass I put in a year ago was about 3 inches. My mom caught 2 of them this week, and they was about 10 to 12 inches long. Do you think they'll spawn this year? If they were going to spawn, they will have spawned. And I think that they have. I think that those fish are mature enough, and they probably had enough nutrition to get to that size. Jason Foley, what do you look for before deciding on when to stock gizzard? Ooh, great question. I am so glad Chico's admonishing me. I know I better get Debbie to dinner. I got that. What do I look like for this? Okay, here's what before I start getting, I'm so glad you asked that because I could have totally overlooked that. That's a great question, Jason. I want at least 25% of the largemouth bass in that lake to be at least 3 pounds or bigger. So I very rarely put gizzard shad in a pond less than 4 years old. On some occasions, I'll put some gizzard shad into a fishery that's 3 years old, but most of the time I won't because I want at least 20. So when we're electrofishing and I'm judging mass in terms of weight, I want at least 25% of the mass of those fish to be at least 3 pounds or bigger. Chico's telling me, and she's in there. I see her walking around. John Harson, speaking of food, I just got a bag of MVP and it had a bunch of golf ball clumps in it. You never seen this? I have not seen that. I have not seen that. That's a quality control issue, and they subcontract that out. So somebody else makes that feed for them. So something's fixing to happen with Purina Mills and Bob Lusk, and I don't know what it is, but there's something fixing to happen. I don't know what it is. Kenny Sanderson, my Aquamax 500 trial showed 1.42 to 1. Pretty good. Yeah, that's right. Is that on bluegill or on smallmouth bass? Okay, Bill Schrum. Virgil Meyer. Good to see Virgil checking in from Iowa. All right, Bill Schrum. I caught a 4.5-inch largemouth on a crappie jig today. About when do you think it was spawned? Well, you're in, northern Oklahoma. I hope it's this year. I hope that's this year's bass. Ian got his fish food with clumps. I'm going to report that to them and see what the deal is. Actually, I'm supposed to be there next Wednesday, I think, and electrofish their lake and at the farm at Gray Summit. We're going to sit down. Have a little sit down. Probably going to be in a boat. Bluegill, okay. Yeah, good. In Indiana. All right, guys. All right. It's 8:19. Debbie's ready to go to dinner. And Chico, I'm going to take Chico's advice. So I'm going to wrap it up. And next Tuesday, I'm going to be headed to Gray Summit, Missouri. I think. I got to remember. Yeah, I think I'm headed there. So if I get there in time to find a hotel room and broadcast, then I will, which I probably will. I'm not going to want to. I'm not going to want to travel all night long. I'm kind of getting past that, although I do it. So, hey, guys, I really appreciate you guys chiming in, watching the show. And I'm sincere about that. I really appreciate it because you guys are helping keep me young, keep my brain percolating, which, a lot of guys my age are sitting on the couch and not doing a damn thing, and I can't do that. It's driving me nuts if I do that. So, hey, I don't know where I'll be, but I'm going to do the best I can to hang out with you guys next week. So, adios for now.